place. In fact, those are not motivators at all. They're not even seen as a reward. They are seen by people as their due. Their expectations demand that they receive that, because if not, they'll go somewhere else and get them. And that indeed rewards today increasingly are the spotlight, some gold braid, being pointed out as a role model, being allowed to further your career through education, being allowed to enlarge your job, to take more responsibility. That today is what rewards are, and we need to know it inside our organizations, but also externally. We're always anxious to build relationships, communicate, and instigate behaviors from folks out there, but what rewards are we giving them if they will give us in return those behaviors? A critical subject in any planning process. Finally, the anthropologists tell us that there has never been a successful society or organization that did not have right at the core someone that we would call a cheerleader. The person who, when everything is going to hell in a handbasket, says it's not really that bad, we're going to turn it around here. And when things are going good, and it's never quite good enough, come on, we can do better, let's move it along. If you think about effective organizations, that function is not left to chance. It is very carefully strategized. Should the boss, should the CEO be the cheerleader? Or indeed, should the CEO be held back and some other person should be the cheerleader? So then the CEO can come in and confirm what the cheerleader is saying. Should we as public relations people be the cheerleaders? Do we need a cheerleader in every work unit, in fact, to kind of whip them up on a local basis? Well, the behavioral scientists would tell us that any planning process worth its salt is going to have to encompass those four items. Just a couple more theories, and then let's get down to an actual investigation of the model. Certainly, no one here needs to be reminded that if we cannot speak with one clear voice, our planning and our activities are going to be a waste. I won't go into a lot of detail about how we got to the one clear voice theory, because I think it's too obvious to all of us. But one of the great advantages of a plan, maybe the number one reason for having a plan, is how else can you focus all the things that are going on to speak with one clear voice, when perhaps several aspects of your organization will all be dealing with similar publics? How can we be sure that we're not contradicting ourselves, competing with ourselves? So this theory of one clear voice is essential to the planning process. Finally, we need to know a lot about research to do any effective public relations today, and that's not our topic. But I do want to talk about one of the more sophisticated results of research on research. Because even though the work was done in 1965, we're not awfully fast learners in our field and in our society. Though the work was done in 1965, it's only in the last 2 or 3 years that it has really been used by practitioners, and with such powerful effect that I want to at least share this one piece of research methodology, because it's very important, particularly in mid-course correction. The work that I'm talking about is called the Mendelssohn effect. It was done by a scholar named Mendelssohn at the University of Denver. And Mendelssohn discovered 2 things about the use of research in making planning effective, in making programs effective. The first thing he discovered was that our long-held tenet that all communications and public relations and relationship programs should have an umbrella theme is in fact a two-edged sword. Mendelssohn does not argue that we do not need themes, because themes organize ideas for people, and they give you a kind of a framework to put those ideas into and make it easy for people to understand. But Mendelssohn discovered in his studies that once we have an umbrella theme, we bore people to death with it. If it's a 6-month campaign, on the last day of the campaign, we're still beating them over the head with the theme. What he discovered was the theme becomes merely an organizer. It's almost a signature, like a motto. And that what you need to do is to treat these campaigns as if they were a personal conversation. Your organization is having a personal conversation with a specific public, let's say. And at certain intervals in the period of time, whatever it is, if it's a one-year program plan or if it's a 6-month campaign, at certain intervals, we need to research that public and find out how much of our message have they already bought and what questions do they have. And if we will do that, then the Mendelssohn type of research becomes like a gyroscope. It just keeps us homing right in on where people are at the moment, instead of, for 6 months, just flailing them with this one message umbrella theme. So the use of research can be very informal. It doesn't have to be expensive, super sample technology or any of that, but just finding out how much of the message do they now understand, what don't they understand, what needs reinforcement, and then changing the message under the umbrella as we move along. Obviously very important in the planning process. Otherwise, the plan, you see, may be counterproductive because we'll put down that old umbrella on step 1 and we'll still be talking about it in month 12. The second thing that Mendelssohn discovered was that communication really has almost no effect on people's behavior, because people just shrug off what they don't want to hear, and they accept only that which already they agree with. This is known as selective perception, and we've had this kind of data for about 40 years, but Mendelssohn looked at it in a different way. He found out that if you do the right kind of research, if you ask the right questions of your public, as you're doing this little mid-course research, that there's a technique for turning people onto your message when they want to reject it. I can perhaps best explain it by giving you Mendelssohn's own example. Mendelssohn did his work for the U.S. government on the subject of seatbelts. Already in 1965, the government wanted to know why nobody wore their seatbelt, and so they gave a large grant to Mendelssohn and some colleagues to find out how come none of us were buying into all these messages that already were drowning us. Wear your seatbelt, don't be seen without your seatbelt, and so forth. Mendelssohn found that the problem was that everybody agreed with those messages, but they didn't think it applied to them. You're an unsafe driver. You should wear your seatbelt. But of course, I'm a safe driver, and I don't need mine. And so Mendelssohn's campaign, which he proposed to the government, was like this. He put together a simple test to break down anyone's ability to claim that they were a safe driver. So then their mind had to be open to hear the message about the seatbelts. His example was you had to put together a test that a little old lady in her 70s who's never had an accident or a ticket and who always is very safe would still have to fail. And so he asked questions like, have you ever not made a full stop at a stop sign? Well, who alive could answer yes? See? Could answer no, rather, that they had always stopped at stop signs. And other simple things like that. And he got this to such a technique that in a 20-second TV spot, he could zip you with 3 of these questions, all of which you had to answer in the negative, and then hit you with a message about seatbelts. And the effect of that message was, in fact, remarkable. Well, we could talk a lot more about research methods, but I thought it was important that at least we consider some of those basic theories. Now that we've covered those, let's see if our plan, as advertised, will put all of these into the process.
We call this plan a meat paper plan for a couple of reasons. First of all, we do this on meat paper. We roll it out and we tape it up to the walls, and it will run from you need to look at your mission statement and start over. Also look at something called a vision statement. Two different things. Vision statement is what, in the best of all possible worlds, would your organization like to see the world like. The mission statement is what your organization will do to get there. Very difficult to separate sometimes, but very interesting process to go through and ultimately come out with. It gives you a very clear idea of where your organization is, what its goals are, what it's trying to do. Once you have the organizational mission, you can then look at the public relations goals. That is. You can't do these until you know what this is, because it should feed directly off of this. If you're not working towards this mission and these goals, you're going the wrong direction. Okay, so at the top of your lead paper, right at the top, your mission and your public relations goals. They stay in front of you the whole time. Never move. Let's put this. We brought one that didn't tear. Okay, then we move down the lead paper. We're into columns. I'm going to go down into columns. The first column we're going to look at, as Pat talked about, the most important thing we got to look at is publics. We've got to design, we've got to figure out who those groups are. Are they already together? Do we have to go find them in certain ways? His mothers with young children, well, you might look at the PTA. You might not. There may not be any PTA in your organization. You may have to find it. There are three types of publics. There's internal. They're external. And then there's a third one, which is a combination of internal and external. These are publics sort of like, let's see, for a hospital, it might be your volunteers. They're really not part of your organization, but they are. For a university, it would be your alumni. For a business, it might be your stockholders. And the goal is to make these internal-external types as much internally attached to your institution as possible. So what you do is you list your publics. And you list them by internal, external, and the mix. And when you've got all that down, what you want to do is prioritize. Because when you're done listing all these, you may have 20, 30 publics, and there's really no way you can get to all of them. Unless you've got a stupendous budget, then that's great. But you need to prioritize. And sometimes in prioritizing, you can put them together. There are some groups that say, okay, we can see there are two different groups here, but we're going to lump them together. We're going to try and get to them. Other times you just can't. Other times you have to make that decision of which publics are most important based on your public relations goals, based on the mission of your organization. When you're looking at the publics, there are two other things you want to look at. You want to look at, in this section, you want to look at opinion leaders. And you want to look at the cheerleaders. This is not easy. It's not easy to identify who your opinion leaders are, your cheerleaders are, but it is very important to do so. Because any plan you put together is going to hinge on these people. Because to get to everybody individually is tough. So you want to identify your opinion leaders and identify your cheerleaders. do you want those publics to do? What behaviors do you want them to elicit? Do you want them to buy your product? Do you want them to use your hospital? Do you want them to just sit back and not do anything? Keep their mouth shut, don't speak for, don't speak against. Sometimes with some people it's better that way. What do you want them to do? And if you can focus on desired behaviors with your publics and you can link those two, you're way ahead of the game.
If you will just take that idea alone away from this meeting, let's assume you're going to forget everything else. You shouldn't, because according to what we know about this kind of information transfer, when it is written and spoken, so you can see it and hear it, and you're making notes, you should remember about 60%. However, let's assume you're going to forget it all. If there's one idea you can take home with you, take home this one. In planning, whether it's a year-long plan or whether it's something you have to do tomorrow, if you will change your behavior to start out by asking the question, what mutually desired behaviors am I after? We can guarantee you your entire professional life will change. Because I'll bet you right now, most of us, the question is, what message should I send? Or we don't even think about that. We head straight for the typewriter or the keyboard. The implication being that somehow these words are going to do things to people. And the evidence is they don't. But if you'll start thinking, I've got to motivate behavior or reinforce existing strong behaviors or modify behaviors, if you'll just make that the first question you ask, we can guarantee you from experience with clients in our own organization, your entire approach to the field will change and your effectiveness will rise probably dramatically. Because now you're talking about the bottom line right here.
In these steps here, when you're going back over your mission, you're looking at your public relations goals, you're talking and defining publics, and desired behaviors, it's a very good point in which to involve your fellow managers, head of your organization. It can take some time if you're starting from scratch, but it is one of the most important things to do is to involve them in this, because then they buy in and they understand what you're doing, what you're trying to do, and where you're going. Otherwise, you own all this, and they, again, will ask, so what? But if they understand your desired behaviors and how you're doing, they'll be with you on this. So this is a real good time to involve. Okay, next column. We know all these. Now, we want to look at what do we know about these publics. So our next column, research status. What do we know about these people? Do we have any formal research that we've conducted on them? Do we have any informal research? Can we go to the opinion leaders and find out what do we know? Now, you don't need to put all that information down here, but you need to know 1982 we did a baseline study. 84 was updated. We know about our patients. We know about this. We know about that. We need to know about these people. We need to know about those people. So you want to know where you are, because very possibly when you get out to the end of this plan, you're going to need to design something you need to know about. You need to know their attitudes and their opinions and what they've done in the past. So you need to look at research. Doesn't have to be fancy research, but it means you need to know something other than just your gut reaction. It always helps to have something else. Next column is one of the behavioral science columns. You want to look at latent readiness. Latent readiness is basically the abuses Pat was talking about, participation rewards, those things that a person is carrying around with them, that when a triggering event occurs, when something happens to make them move, which way are they going to go? What's going to happen? What is inside of them? So latent readiness involves abuses, which are psychological. It may be real, it may be perceived, but they're abuses. They're what we call affinities. What are they predisposed to do versus not to do? Why do they hate you versus why do they like you? And then where are they going to go with that? Participation, which Pat already discussed, and rewards. How can we involve them? What would they see as a reward? What would move them? Got that going. Next column. If you got that, he's ready to there. Next column. Now you're down to what you're going to do. We're going to talk about measurable objectives for the year. Key is measurable. What can we quantify? If our desired behavior is to have patients use our hospital, what is our measurable objective? Are we going to get 300 more? Are we going to have 90% bed occupancy versus 85, which was last year? What can we measure? So when we get down the chart and we look at evaluation, what are we going to be able to measure against? Usually, sometimes you use numbers on this. Anything that you can truly get your hands around and say, this is where we've stepped up. Measurable. When measurable objectives do, they lead back directly to desired behaviors. Two are intricately linked. If your desired behavior is to have people love you, then but that's not measurable. So you have to say, well, 50% of the people who love us. That's measurable. Then we look at a column called strategies. Strategies are the behavioral science theories, communication theories that Pat was talking about. This is the column where we say, what do we know? And what do we know in the science of this field that will help us reach these measurable objectives by getting past people who have abuses, affinity? What are we going to do to move them? Are we going to use the diffusion process? Are we going to have to use zillion of the different theories that we can move them past there to get to the desired behaviors? We plug them in here, and we think about it because this is a very easy column to say, don't have enough time, we've been at this for 4 days, we're all tired, let's skip it and go on. But if you don't think at least and say, well, we're going to use the diffusion process here. We're going to use networks here. It doesn't hang together. So we push them, we use them together. Then we have a column of action. What action are we going to take? We have an objective for 90% bed occupancy. Action is going to be getting more awareness that the hospital is even here, letting people know about the special services we have. Maybe we have to open a different unit that's not being served in this area, whatever action. But then those are very specific. And they may be for this one objective. You may have 10, 1 through 10 different action points you're going to take for that. You get past action, we look at, very realistically, budget. Budget. Vendors, equipment, dollars, and manpower. Because up to here, from there on and up to here, we've been looking at if all things were perfect. And then we've got it back up. One of the key goals in putting a plan like this together is not to let anybody in the room say, oh, we tried that before. Oh, we don't have the money. It's, you go in and you say ground rules, no negatives here, we're going to do, if the world was perfect. When you get to here, you can worry about, we don't have the money. And then you can narrow it down. You say, what things should we do? What can we afford? And then there's one last column, which I will sneak in. And that's evaluation. And this evaluation includes mid-course as well as the end same mistakes next year. So you always want to do the evaluation. And I'm going to talk more about that tonight, so we don't have to deal with it.
Let me just talk a little bit about the action phase, because the way that we have found the action phase is key. All of this actually leads up, of course, to the action phase, because the question is, what are we going to do during the year? Generally, the action phase we do as a PERT chart, either by the week or by the month, so that under that column here, you really now get into detail. Many times we've come to doing it by the week, so that this is why we need the meat paper. There are 52 lines talking about what are we going to do. I mean, just think of this now for a minute. What are we doing with our top priority public in this week and this week and this week? And so that at one glance, you can look at that public and all that you're going to do for that public for the year. So you can quickly see we're doing too much. We're overburdening them. We're going to drown them. Or we're not doing enough. And you can follow each public along. And then you can read vertically. And you can see that everything you're going to do is being done in February and March. You know, you just can't do it. You haven't got the person power. And so you can start stretching those things out to when they will indeed be doable. Or you can perhaps combine some activities. Maybe you were going to do something for Public 2 and for Public 6 at about the same time, and you start seeing you got a budget or a person power problem, so you say, hey, let's combine that. Let's create an event that will bring all of them together, both of those publics together, so that both horizontally and vertically, you know how to plan your work all year long. You don't get those weeks when you've got 6 weeks of work to do in 1 week. Furthermore, and this may be the best thing of all, this will help you stop trying to send 62 messages to a public in a year. Because everything we know today is that people are over-communicating. Remember what the trial lawyers teach us. Never, never, never say the trial lawyers make more than 3 or 4 points to a jury. They can't remember anymore. It seems to me there's wisdom in that for us. And we say don't try and do more than 3 or 4 things in a year for a specific public, even one that's very close to you. Because if you follow it all, people's receptivity, people's time availabilities today, you know that if you can get 3 or 4 ideas implanted in a public in a year, that's tremendously effective. And if you throw 62 at them, you know what the result usually is? They don't get any, because they just turn them away. So that the real genius here is this week by week or month by month activity. And in fact, if say you're doing some kind of a newsletter to your alumni is a job in your college or your high school, well, you know it's going to come out this week and this week and this week. Well, then you can back up from that. You know the week it has to go for production. You know when the stories have to be in. And you, in essence, have a chart of everything you and your staff have to do for the whole year, at least